Hello, and welcome to the Career Journey podcast, No Wrong Choices, where we speak with some of the world's most interesting and accomplished people to shine a light on the many different ways we can achieve success. I'm Larry Samuels, soon to be joined by Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea. Please support our show by following No Wrong Choices on your favorite podcasting platform, connecting with us on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, X, and Threads, or by visiting our website at NoWrongChoices.com. This episode features the Associate Athletic Director and Play-by-Play Man for the United States Military Academy at West Point, Rich DeMarco. Tushar, I know Rich is a good friend of yours, so why don't you set this one up for us?
All right, so much like for Matt Pizarro, who we had on in last season, I've known Rich DeMarco since we were kids, and I do mean that in a very literal sense. You know, I was just a couple of years ahead of him in school. He is a good friend of my cousin's. That's how I got to meet him and got to know him. And I've had the pleasure of, being friendly with him and being friends with him for the past 30 some odd years, and to see his rise through the ranks. He's a bit weird in his journey because he hasn't had a lot of jobs, and the job that he has currently over at West Point, in many ways, you could consider his dream job. And once you hear his story, you'll understand why, because he is part of a history and a tradition that so many of us will never understand. And at an academy like West Point, with the history, the way it goes back to the very birth of this country, there's a lot of great stories to be had, to be told, to know. And to be part of that culture is wonderful.
I'm excited to talk to Rich. There's so much history, as you said, T, that at West Point. I've never had the pleasure or the honor of visiting West Point. It's been on my bucket list for a long time. I go up to Bear Mountain to do some hiking, and West Point is right there. It's so enticing in the Hudson Valley. It's gorgeous country. It's beautiful. But yeah, the history, it's just rich with tradition and history. And when you think about, Army football, Army basketball, the institution of West Point is exciting, and Rich he embodies it, right? So really excited to talk to him. And you're right, T. I think this is his dream job. And it's fascinating when you meet somebody who's has their dream job at a really young age, too, and has been there for quite a while. So really fascinating story.
Absolutely. Well, with that, here is Rich DeMarco to tell us the story, or his story, of being at West Point. Now joining No Wrong Choices is the Associate Athletic Director and Play-by-Play Man for the United States Military Academy at West Point, Rich DeMarco. Rich, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
All right, so his title sounds really important.
And long.
And I will tell you guys this. I've known this guy a long time. We usually say full disclosure, so full disclosure. I've known him since we were kids. Another one, we had a guest on a while ago who's also a mutual friend, Matt Pizarro, over with the Bucks. I've known Rich DeMarco since we were kids. Another one of the friends of my cousin. And, I actually had the pleasure of having Rich be an intern under me while I was over at WFAN as well. And I'm sure there are plenty of stories that we can go back and forth with from that time as well. Rich, before we get into the stories and reminisce about the old days, why don't you tell folks what you're doing currently?
So I got an amazing job, right? I work at West Point, work in the athletic department, associate athletic director. I have my hands in some different things, oversee our licensing, work with some of our internal units, like our IT unit, leading that, also our logistics. And then I'm able to also, work with our external unit fairly extensively, and lucky enough to call the play-by-play for Army football, Army men's basketball, and just have living the dream. Just
what's
living
the external?
the dream.
What's the external unit for
Well,
Army?
that's BR. Whether our marketing, communications. Whether it's emceeing stuff. Being involved in some projects that we do. If we're doing like a video series to voice over, help conceptualize. Things of that nature. So it's really just awesome. Every day's different, and it's a lot of fun, right? Going to work every day. People are great. The content is great, and really overall, right? We're all working for the Corps cadets, right? 4,400 future leaders. So that makes it as fulfilling as you could find.
That's fantastic. Take us back to the beginning. Where'd you grow up? What was your childhood like? Were you always into sports? Was that always a part of it? And what sport?
I was always into sports, right? I never played football, but football was always my favorite sport. Of course, played basketball, baseball through like 8th grade. In high school was able to, be a manager of our basketball team, which was actually really, really good, and made the state quarterfinals in 1992 county.
Who was better, you or Matt Pizarris in one-on-one?
Oh, Pizarris! Hey, come on, Matt was a good player, but I knew Tushar because Tushar's cousins, Sanjay and Sunil, they were part of this. We called it rotisserie baseball back then, not fantasy. It's fantasy.
I still call it that today.
That's a new. I mean, and the rotisserie book would come out every year with its little one-liners and the dollar projections for each player. So Tushar, growing the league, it was, they had Sanjay's cousin, Sunil's cousin from Bergenfield would join. So Tushar was part of our league. So the whole back and forth, you're arguing, you're fighting over trades, Pete and Cavilla, Doug Drabeck, these kind of people.
Imagine those conversations back.
Hey,
I'll trade
with Tushar, no less.
For Pete and Cavilla.
It was crazy. I mean, I made a big run at Nick Asaski the year he signed with the Braves. Then he got vertigo and really never played for them right after the big year with Boston. No, it was just knowing Tushar and all the back and forth and everything. And it was hilarious and it was a lot of fun. And then it was so interesting because, maybe from, we were like in 7th or 8th grade, the 4 or 5 years after that, Tushar, a couple years older than me, he's in college. And, in high school, just hearing whether it's Sunil or Sanjay saying, oh, he's at Fordham, doing this and everything. And then I had known through the grapevine, he was at FAN. So then my senior year in college at Rutgers, I interned at FAN.
Yes,
and
you did.
There, one of the, the stalwart tape ops. I was known as a tape guy, and Tushar was like one of the top tape guys. And now I remember those Sunday shifts. Tushar would make sure in the second studio that the VCR was running to tape The Sopranos for himself, and then we would
The Simpsons.
We'd
and the Simpsons.
yeah.
All right, let me interrupt. All right, so my rule for all interns was this: you need to learn this job as quick as possible because I want to watch TV from 7 to 8 at night with no interruptions. If you don't learn as quick as you can, and I have to work from 7 to 8, your internship will be hell. That was my rule.
But there's something to be said for that though, because I think when you're an intern, you're not going to learn unless you're thrown into the fire. And whether Tushar said that, in jest or there was some seriousness.
There was a lot of seriousness,
enjoyment, but also the enrichment of the intern. I thought it was great, working under Tushar. And then, Craig Chavities would show up, to do the IMIS shift and everything. I had a lot of fun, lot of fun with the folks at FAN on the tape side. Tape, there's a lot of pressure when you're doing tape, but I love it.
Why is there pressure when you're doing tape?
Because back then, I mean, you really couldn't pull it off archives. There were no like internet archives. I can only imagine what it's like now, right? Yeah. Going back, almost you're scrubbing back. You had to run on it. You had to roll on it. If you weren't rolling, it was tough luck. And then, you had to cut it, put it on the carts, and then the update person would be there, waiting for your carts, and the initials were on every cart. And I used to think it was so we could get credit. I came to realize your initials were on every cart where if something went wrong, blame. They know who to call.
Yeah. All right. So let me explain real quick when you're saying, you had to run, had to run reels and you had to run carts. I mean, this is basically ancient history. Like if you're like, let's say 25 and under at this point, you're listening to this. This is basically ancient technology to you. We literally had giant tape reels that we had to put down on recorders and record games. And when he says a cart is essentially like a giant 8-track tape. And they were of obviously different lengths. And you had to be able to record these things cleanly, in and out. And if you couldn't do that, this really is, it's almost like being a blacksmith in some senses, right? Yeah. It's a very, very skilled position. And it really was an art. It's an art form, a lost art form now, because everyone can do it pulling stuff from digital. But it really was an art form back then because you literally had a grease pencil, you literally had a razor, and sometimes you would have to cut into these tape reels to make these edits. It was a fun time to work back then. Obviously, the lost art, the business has changed. But, these are some of the great memories that we have from when we started our careers.
So it seems like it was a rite of passage, though. I mean, surely you're not going to FAN thinking, I can't wait to cut tape. Like, I can't wait to get at that
You're
tape,
right.
man. Like, you're trying to get on the air, right? I mean, was that the dream at that point?
It was, but I had in my mind and even saw, and then Tushar could speak to this too, your interns that are constantly asking about, oh, when am I going to get on the air? When am I going to do that? My thought is I'm there to do a job, right? And the better I can do my job and show my value to the organization, they'll want me around if any opportunities come in the future, or I could parlay the experience and the contacts I make there to better my career. That would be fine with me. So that's kind of the attitude I took when I was there. And I enjoyed it. It was great. It was hard work, but I never had any delusions. You'd see some of these young kids coming in, and you talk about Tushar saying you wouldn't be long for the internship. I mean, if kids came in thinking they were going to be on the air, they weren't going to be long for the internship.
Well,
Right.
And it's interesting because that's exactly what I want to ask you next. I think about these TV personalities who break in, who paid their dues, who started doing production and editing and all this other stuff with a dream. But how do you cross that threshold? And like for you, you were passionate about sports growing up, but that's just one part of it. That's why you wound up in the space. But did you have a massive personality? Like, what was it about you that got you to jump that wall from being an intern, a production guy, to somebody giving you a chance to take a mic?
I always, and I still keep the attitude now of being, well-rounded and well-balanced. So, I always in my mind, thought that if I could, do a little bit on air, do a little bit of, I ended up doing some news reporting too. If you end up doing a lot of that different things, you're going to not only will stay current, but you'll be available. You'll be prepared for any opportunity that would come up in that space. I was lucky enough when I was in college. And that's the other thing, I hear kids, well, now it's so different with digital and TV. There could be 5 different broadcasts. But I was lucky going to Rutgers in that I was able to do games fairly early in my college career and do a lot of games. And then the play-by-play guy at Rutgers, Bruce Johnson, just being in circles with him, he used to listen to the student stations, especially when we did women's basketball games that the flagship couldn't do because of conflicts. And he liked my work, said many times, hey, I think you could, do this. So what I had done was when I was at FAN, I had a part-time job working on air at a station in North Jersey. And then I was sending my tapes to Bruce. And then after about a year, May of 99, which was a year out of school, and I was doing some play-by-play too, some high school play-by-play, very little though. And then I was hired down at WCTC in New Brunswick, was able to do, full high school schedule, football and basketball, news reporter, sports reporter, did some talk shows and everything. And that's kind of the route I wanted to take. I did Rutgers women's basketball, play-by-play, did pregame football and men's hoops. I think when I got to FAN, in my mind, I was like, oh, it would be cool to be these talk show hosts. And I realized that very early on that I did not want to be a talk show host. So as much as, I meet people now, they're like, I want you to talk. And it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just I looked at, talk show hosts and I looked at what they went through and how they approached it. And it was just not something I had any interest in doing, which was weird because I thought I wanted to do that.
So at what point did you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to make this commitment to be a play-by-play guy?
I think, I look, if you go back to when I went to college, right? So I went to college in the engineering school because I was a pretty good math student in high school. And then, I joined the radio station at my freshman year. And then, I kind of thought I knew a lot about sports when I was in high school. And I'm like, I'm going to go to college and, there's going to be people that know 10 times more than me. It's going to be a joke. So when I was on the radio station, I realized I knew a fair amount of sports and I thought I had a chance to be pretty good. So like the first day of my sophomore year, I'm like, I can't do engineering. So I said, I want to be play-by-play, right? I want to do play-by-play or talk show. And then I think, after I graduated college, I was like, you know what, like my goal, in college, my goal was always to be a college football and basketball play-by-play announcer for the school. That was my goal because I think that there's a connection in college you don't have in the pros. And I think that being a local broadcaster is so much better than being a national broadcaster because you become connected with a team. Now, not to say if there's national opportunities and the financial situations that come with that are something you're going to turn down. But, you know, I really wanted to be connected to a team. You know, it's like being on a team, right? And that was really important to me to pursue that.
So you come out of Rutgers. How did you pursue your next step? Like you said, you did Rutgers women's basketball. You're doing a lot of stuff. Are these people you know? Are they you sending a tape and they're calling you in for an interview, audition? How does that work?
So I just thought, hey, you know, my goal when I graduated and I was sending tapes down to WCTC in New Brunswick was that, you know what, my goal is I'm going to get a job at WCTC. I'm going to work there for 15, 20 years. When Bruce Johnson retires, I'll become the play-by-play voice of Rutgers. That was in my mind. That's what was going to happen. That was going to be my life. You know, I was intern at FAN, working part-time there. I'm hired down at WCTC. That's the job I wanted was the Rutgers play-by-play job. I thought I'd be the best at it. And that's what I wanted. You know, things go a little differently. And it ended up being, you know, in how it is now, you know, 10 times better. But that was when you say like what I wanted to be. That was just focused in my mind. I was going to go down to WCTC, work under Bruce for however many years he had left doing it, and then I was going to become the guy. And that was probably what I thought, and that was my end goal.
All right. So how long were you over at CTC?
5 years. So 2004, there was some changeover on the radio crew down there when I was there. Bruce then was out. They replaced him, you know, new crew and everything, and I kind of knew that if I had to, I felt I could do play-by-play, do it at a high level. So I knew that if I was going to move up, it was not going to be there, right? I'd have to leave, which was it, and ended up turning out so amazing. And in 2004, a job had opened up at Army, a director of broadcasting job, where it was going to be sidelines for football, coaches show for football, and play-by-play for men's and women's basketball, along with some like sales assistant duties in the external area and that kind of stuff. And the job was open in 2001. Got involved late in the search. Again, this is before like the internet when you're looking for jobs, right? Yeah. You'd have people telling you and all this.
So you're still sending out letters at this point.
Yes. So in 2001, I applied. Got involved late in the search in 2001. Did not get the job. But waited my time. You know, hey, look, I'm a big believer, you know, when I give advice to kids, like I'm all about playing the long game with everything. So involved in the job at 2001, didn't get the job, kept in touch with the folks there. I mean, when they tell you when you don't get the job and they're like, keep in touch, you know, I'll hold someone to that until they tell me not to, right? You know, people say keep in touch, whether it's serious or not. So I kept in touch. You know, every 6 months I'd send them a letter, send an email. Hey, you know, if there's any opportunities, I get a call in January of 2004 saying, hey, we're making a change. You know, the job's open. Would you be interested? And I said, absolutely. Interviewed down there the day St. Joe's lost its first game of the 2003-04 season, quarterfinals of the A10 tournament. That was my interview day at Army. And then I got the job. And it's been great. It's perfect. It's I couldn't ask for more. It's really the best place to be.
So before we dig into that, and I want to spend a lot of time on that, I'm curious about the process of getting good. So, you know, you want to get as many reps as you can. You want to be in front of the mic as often as possible. But are there other tricks of the trade? Meaning, you know, how are you prepping? How are you preparing? Were there people that you looked up to who taught you this craft? Like, how do you learn it?
It's a great question. And so I was really lucky when I was at Rutgers and WRSU. You know, we had a great group of broadcasters who were older than me. And when you start doing games, you know, how kind of the rite of passage would be is like when you were a younger person. I think my first game when I was a sophomore, right? Army, Rutgers played Navy of all teams. You know, you would spend some time week of the game with the other person you were doing it with to kind of prepare together. And a young person would do it with an older person. I saw how like they drew out their charts and prepped and everything. And then I like to take things from different places, right? You know, so that was one way I prepared and everything. I think I got to a point where over preparing, that's a terrible word to use, right? But I think that, you know, because I believe, right, the Dick Enberg thing, right? I'm only going to use 30% of what I prep, but I don't know what 30% it is.
Interesting.
Right. So I believe in that. I believe in a ton of prep. I believe in a lot of, reading. And I just tried to every year and every season do a little bit more than I was the year before. So when I started doing high school, right, I was like, I prepped one way in 1999 or 2000. Then the next year I said, you know what, I want to add in, when I talk to the coaches to get, one little tidbit about each player off the field that I can use. Okay, this next year, I want to be able to add in, the specialist. Well, I'm just making stuff up here. And I tried to add one new thing each year that I just, from my observation and perception, I think would help me. And I tried to do that at Army. I still try to do it now. And when I got the Army play-by-play job, Bob Sosi, who's a very good friend, he's the New England Patriots play-by-play guy, and he had been the Navy play-by-play guy for several years, and I'd gotten to know him a little bit. He was shared with me his charts, right, the digital of his. So I've been using Bob's since 2010, but I've made my own little changes to them, added stuff in, and I think it comes down to build, because I always say for the home team, right, for Army, right. I mean, in theory, I'm prepping all year for them. The whole week of the game isn't preparing Army. The whole week of the game is preparing the opponent, right? Because that's the variable. So, you build out the opponent, on like a Saturday night or Sunday, right? I'll update my Army charts with stats, and I'll call them tidbits from the previous game and add to my bios on my boards. And then I'll try to build out the 2 deep of the opponent. If I don't have their game notes, I'll use the previous game notes and build out their 2 deep. Then I'll go through all their stats, update them with all stats, all personal information. And then I start tearing into, probably Monday or Tuesday, start tearing into newspaper articles about the team, their biggest players, like feature stories. And when you play some teams out of some of the conferences that Army's played, whether it's the Sun Belt Conference or Conference USA, a lot of times there's not a ton of information. And then I'll just, as the week goes on, just update information I can get, usually try to talk with their play-by-play announcer. And then I try to watch their previous games, which has become so easy now with ESPN Plus. And YouTube is even better because, I know some of these sites get shut down, but basically any game that was on TV the previous week is on YouTube without any commercials. So you can find those. And then, we have our coaches show. I'll be at practice doing interviews one night, coaches show Thursday night, that I'd like to set some time with the opposing team SID day of the game. Yeah. And I learn a lot from our color guy at Army, Dean Darling, who's been doing this 40 something years. And he's also the Marist basketball play-by-play guy. He's the most prepared person I've ever worked with. So I've really tried to absorb so much from him. So that's really that's what my week kind of looks like during football.
All right. So you've taught yourself, obviously, how to prep almost as if you're going to class, you're going to another class. Did coaches take notice of this over the years when you were in school? Did they say, Rich, wow, you seem really prepared, Were you looked upon as not simply a student, but more like an actual member of the media?
That's a really good question, because I built a good relationship with Terry Shea, who was the Rutgers coach for 5 years from 1996 to 2000. And when I was in college, he made would say a lot of things like that to me, like, hey, you do a really good job. Is there anything I can do with you? He had written letters of recommendation for me for an internship I had, which he volunteered to write. So yeah, I think it did. I think with the sports information office at Rutgers probably took a little notice too, that I was, prepared and doing it for the right reasons. But a lot of us were doing a really good job, man. It was a really good student media group that I was with. But yeah, and then those are little things that, you don't think of at the time, but those were probably things that encouraged me, that was like, hey, you know what, maybe I can do this. Hey, this person believes in me. This person is, giving me, more time than they need to. So it all adds up, right? How you treat people. Remember, right? It's not what you did. It's how you make people feel. So, people made me feel like I could do it, whether it was, subliminally or, it was obvious, and it wore off.
Putting the sports aside, West Point in and of itself, talk about the environment, the people. You talked about the history there. That had to be a real learning curve for you to get busy and figure out how you were going to fit into the mesh of what is an institution. How did that go for you? Was it overwhelming? Talk about West Point itself and how amazing it is.
It's the greatest place, right? You go into work and there's people on buses taking tours, right? So I get paid to come up here, right? And people are paying to come here. I always think about that, but it's It's interesting because I've read a lot of stories, and I'm really into the whole, I don't know if it's a subculture, but play-by-play announcers, like their road, where they're from at the schools that they do. I mean, Eli Gold's from New York City, right? And he's the voice of Alabama in the Deep South, right? So I I looked at it, and I think so much is having the respect and the really the respect of the fan base. And I'm very sensitive to that, and that could really turn on a play-by-play guy or anyone associated with the team. So I'm very, I'm just being very clear to, like, know what I don't know, don't know what I don't know, and I'll be able to tell people, always looking to learn, not looking to overstep, where I am or what I should be entitled to or anything, and just learn and just ask questions and just get to know people, and, show them that I'm there to help, and that, the goal of me is just to be the best I could do and the best for the academy. So I really took that when I went to Army, because it was a ton of learning for me. And, I think over the course of time, I've built a relationship with the fan base and the team, and that means a lot to me.
Looking beyond the fan base, what is your role within that community? Obviously West Point is one of the more important and more prestigious, or whatever word I'm looking for, organizations, parts of our country.
Military institutions.
Yeah, military institutions.
Yeah.
What is your relationship with the generals, the military? Like, because that's a community, that's a culture. I mean, that transcends normal fandom.
How much do you actually interact with that type of higher rank?
Oh yeah. I mean the lieutenant general who is the superintendent of West Point, Steve Gilland, he is amazing. I know him pretty well, and he'll always come over and say hi. Interviewed him several times, and I can just tell it makes me feel like I'm someone he likes to be around, and is positive for the program, and and that makes me feel great, right? That's why you do it, right? You want to feel included. You want to feel like you're part of what's going on. And I've been very, very, very fortunate. All the generals that have passed through West Point, I've had really, really good relationships with. Darrell Williams, Bob Caslin. They've been nothing but amazing to me. And I think it's I'd like to think it has to do with me doing a good job, and they're very appreciative, and I'm appreciative of them for all that they do and what they've sacrificed and done serving our country, and now running this great institution.
Is there a difference? And obviously, there's a huge historical portion to Army, to West Point, dating back to the beginnings of this country. Is there a big difference when you head to the campuses of Navy down in Annapolis, or you head to Air Force out in Colorado? Is there just a different atmosphere, whether it be on the collegiate front or just a different atmosphere overall when you head to these places, rather than going to, let's say, a Louisville or a Cincinnati or a Notre Dame?
I think it's interesting you say that, because each of the academies has its own personality, right?
Sure.
You're at West Point, and it's the history, right? It's the granite. It's, on these, on the grounds of West Point. I mean, so much happened in the American Revolution, right? And it was, so I think that when you're at West Point, it's really the true history lesson. Navy has Annapolis. They're by the water. There's a whole different vibe down there. I think the one thing, a big difference with Navy is, that's not a military installation. That's just the academy down there, where, West Point, there are soldiers that are stationed at West Point, right? So it's a bigger community, at least on the grounds. Then you got to Air Force, and, it's the range, as they say, right? It's what's it? West Point is post, the Annapolis is the yard, and Air Force is the range. And it's it's a lot more spread out. Obviously, you drive around there. It just amazes me when you go from the football stadium to the academic buildings. It's like there's just nothing there as you're driving, for obvious reasons. They're flying planes over a lot of that, and it's and that's really more of a that's more of like a pro sports area of the three, right? Because when you're in Colorado Springs,
yeah.
You're an hour down to Denver. There's a very pro sports vibe. At least I feel when I'm out there. Where aside from Annapolis and West Point, but each has their own personality and their own kind of feeling and culture.
When you are calling a game for Army, and I imagine there is a parallel to being the play-by-play guy for the New York Yankees. Is there a bias in a way? If you're, calling one team all the time and you're putting their story forward, do you feel any pressure to present the story in a particular way?
It's a good question. I feel a responsibility to, tell the Army story, right, of the Army players. I also feel a responsibility to tell the opposing team story, right? Because really anyone could call a game and only know one team, right? The team that they cover. And I'm not going to name names, but I've been, we've done games talking to the other play-by-play announcers where they have zero prep on Army. And that goes back to just my own personal research of listening and seeing what I wanted to be when I was a play-by-play announcer. I didn't want to be one of these announcers that says we all the time and us and is just very one-sided, right? I wanted to bring as much, because I think I owe it to the listeners, right, to be as prepared for Army as I am for the opponent, whether it's Navy, Air Force, Ball State, UTSA. And really call it down the middle. So anyone who turns on can hear, can listen, can maybe learn a little bit. And, of course, I'm going to get more excited when Army scores than the opponent scores. But I don't want, the best compliment would be if someone turned it off saying, you know what, it was a listenable broadcast because it wasn't one-sided. I could hear everything the way it was going on, but it was an Army broadcast. And that's probably what I'm striving for each time we go out to a game.
I almost hate to ask this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You ever make an on-air mistake? It's part of the learning process,
all the time.
Right? Do you
all the time.
Acknowledge
Haven't
it?
you listened to any of his broadcasts?
Exactly.
What time did we start today?
Tushar did his prep. Come on.
So what's the general rule? Do you acknowledge it or do you let it go? What is your general? I sometimes hear it, just don't correct them, just keep moving, right?
I always correct it, or I'll say it, the right way, like soon after. Okay. Say, because I listen to a lot of people, and so like I'm not gonna say like I'm sorry, it's this guy. I say, too short of the carry. Oh no, Larry with the carry. And subliminally correct it. We don't need to like waste words by like apologizing. I don't think it's as grave a mistake as that. But you have to correct it. No one's perfect. Come on.
Is there a moment that you look back on where you're like, oh yeah, that was a bad one? Like what's your favorite mistake?
That's a good one.
We always remember the bad.
Even in college, like something that you just totally blew and you were embarrassed afterwards and you're like, oh boy.
Yeah. A good one. There's so many to choose from. I'm trying to think right now.
Narrow it down.
You know what? There's always a couple where I'll like get the fumble recovery wrong because I'll be so, quick and I'll see only like one number of the guy. And those really, really bother me. I'm trying to think. There was one time, 2010, my first year doing the football play-by-play. Duke's quarterback. I forget who Duke's quarterback was. But when they get in close, they would bring in Brandon Connett, who was the backup, and he would run. And I didn't check that he had come in the game. And I said the other quarterback scored the touchdown. And it was really Connett. And I was like, oh, it's Connett who scored. I forget who the starter for Duke, but the backup was Connett, who I think I wore number like 18 or something. And I said that the starter scored the touchdown like on a bootleg run, which wasn't good.
It happens.
Could have been worse.
Yeah,
could have been worse. I could do that. Larry could do that.
How many Commanders Cups have you called at this point?
So it took Army a while to win that Commander in Chiefs trophy. So they'd won it in 96, didn't win it again until 2017. So I've been lucky enough to call 2017, 2018, 2020 during the COVID year, and this past year when Army won it for the fourth time under Jeff Monken. So obviously the president's supposed to come to these games.
This doesn't happen anywhere. It doesn't happen at the Iron Bowl. It doesn't happen at the Red River game. Once again, this is about history. What is that atmosphere like when you're calling? And we'll get eventually to the idea, because I kind of want to get back to something you had said originally, which was, why you like college over the pros. And I want to get back to that. But I also want to touch on this. Like, you call very unique games, right? There are very few games out there which have the amount of history that you call. Army, Navy, Army, Air Force. But the Commander's Cup game, the President of the United States comes to this game. For a couple of things. One, what is that like? Two, the Secret Service contacts you ahead of time. And then three, have you met any of the presidents?
I have not met. I've come close to the presidents. I've not, actually, the one that I met, well, sort of, was 2004, my first year with Army. I'm sideline reporter for Army Navy, and we actually changed some internal rules because of me. So I would go out for the coin toss, right, with my microphone and everything, and I, hey, you got to get the sound for the coin toss, right? So I end up next to the official, and George Bush is there, right? So he comes out and everything. So there's like, if you
wait, W or Herbert Walker?
W. So
okay.
I'm out there next to the referee, and then Bush comes out, and there's like these, if you watch like on CBS TV, and even my voice came over the referee mic because I was so close. And there was like a great TV shot of like me, the referee, and Bush, and then I think it was like, so I basically photobombed all of the great photos we wanted of the coin toss. So I think now they protect the area, they sequester it. We're only like a couple photographers are inside. But here's another present story.
Because of Rich DeMarco.
Because of me. The 2016 game, right? Donald Trump had been elected, but he had not yet taken office. He was the president-elect. But he came to the Army-Navy game. That's when Army broke the streak. They had lost 14 in a row against Navy. And that game was played at M&T Bank Stadium. So this is a really good one. So when you go in the press box at M&T Bank Stadium, you go in the entrance, hard to explain. Like, you go in the entrance, and then the broadcast booths are on the right, and the working media is on the left, where like the bathrooms are, right? So if you like go to the bathroom, you have to you come out of your booth and you have to cross the area that's like the entrance to then go to the bathroom or whatever. So Trump came in at halftime to go on, I think, in the third quarter of that game on TV, which was the booth like next to us. So I had gone to the bathroom early at halftime, gotten back. The Secret Service came in about midway through halftime and created a wall. So if you had gone to that half of the press box, you couldn't get back to the broadcast booth.
Oh, geez.
So I remember getting back, I'm like, oh my gosh. And I think there were a couple, there's all the, it's Army radio, Navy radio, the cadet radio, midshipman radio, Westwood One, everything. I mean, there had to be someone, because there were people saying, I need to get through. And they're like, no, you can't get through. And I'm like, man, if I got to the bathroom 3 minutes later, I wouldn't even get back to the booth.
Someone would have to pinch hit and call the game, I guess.
So at that moment, Rich DeMarco was the only person in America calling the Commander Cup game
under the protection of secret security
across the world.
That was great. It was. I mean, they cut, and it's just an awkward. And I think that stadium's probably gone through a bunch of renovations now, but it was just funny because basically it was like a line. They'd created this like wall that you couldn't get through. So that was kind of funny. That's an interesting presidential moment.
So I mean, it's safe to say you're kind of living your dream. Is that true to say?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, when you live your dream and that's your profession, like, what do you dream about? There's nothing left.
I'll tell you what I dream about. Yeah. I dream about being the play-by-play announcer for Army men's basketball's first ever NCAA tournament.
There you
go.
There
4 schools
keep dreaming.
Basketball in 1930. There were 5. My dad's alma mater, St. Francis, New York, got rid of athletics. So there's now 4 teams that have had basketball since 1939, when the first tournament was held, and have not made the tournament. And I want to be the play-by-play guy.
Pretty good.
I will tell you this: you might want to keep dreaming.
Army's won 3 in a row.
What is life without hope?
You coach?
True enough. True
Good
enough.
freshman.
So Rich, it's rare when anyone in your position has longevity in any position like this, right? So, to be the Yankees play-by-play guy, right? For most of us out there, we know John Sterling is longtime voice of the Yankees. You don't start out. Your first job, your first or even your second job, is not the Yankee job. It's some other job somewhere else. But for you, your second job out of college has been essentially your career. What's that like? I mean, you have a very unique spot. No one does what you do. You have had a tremendous amount of longevity.
I just try to, do the best every day, right? You're going to have your good days, you're going to have your bad days, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to, learn from them and everything, and just keep pushing forward. I think, the best years of my life have been when I've been working at West Point. I was married at West Point in 2008. My kids are lucky enough to, enjoy games. One of them's a huge sports fan, and he's able to come up to basketball games, interact with the team. They treat him really, really well. Football team treats him awesome. So it's living your life and just enjoying all of that in the backdrop of what you do. And that's why it's very, very hard for me to picture leaving, because I'm not sure, you go back to all those things, right? Of being accepted by a fan base, of, being a part of a team, the kind of, reach and respect that you have being a place like West Point. When you mix all that up and you consider all that, it's hard to picture being anywhere else.
All right. So you mentioned a moment ago that the notion of that you wanted to be a collegiate play-by-play guy rather than a professional. Why?
I just feel there's so much passion with college sports, so much more passion. There's a couple things. So like I'm a big New York Jets fan, right? If I decorated a room, I'm 47 years old. If I decorated a room in my house just for the New York Jets, right? People would think there's something wrong with me, even more so than they think now, right? But if I were to decorate it for a college football program or something, a school I went to, a school I was a part of, a school I worked at, people would think that's cool, right? There's a passion there that's not there with pro sports.
I don't know.
T-shirt's not true. Here's the other one too. I was thinking of this one, right? So pro NFL to college football, right? Here's another one, and then I'll give you a third. So, like, I look at NFL like watching a movie, right? Where, you know what, your attention is there for that whole movie. You're waiting for that movie to come out. It's going to be appointment watching for you when you watch it. And then you know what, you're going to move on after it. Where I think of college football like your favorite television show, where you're waiting each week. There's buildup. You're thinking about it every day. There's a passion. You're looking forward to it. And I think that college football has that longevity. I'm not saying a great TV show is better than a great movie or vice versa, but I think the TV show you live, the TV show, every day you're thinking about that next episode. You want to see where it goes. You're invested in the characters. Where I think the movie's going to get more people watching it, right? But you're going to watch it, and then you're going to kind of move on and watch it when it's on, whenever the next time, whenever that is. And I feel like, that to me is how I feel about college sports as opposed to pro sports, for me at least. And I think the other thing is, look, and this is, I've said this for years. When you're a play-by-play guy, right? The greatest compliment you can get is like if someone wasn't able to be at a game, right? And they had to listen on the radio. They were forced to listen on the radio. And they come up and say, hey, you know what, man? They'll see it like an event. Hey, that game I couldn't be at, I was listening to, you were great. Took me through the game. That's like the friggin' best. That's the best compliment you're going to get, right? But when I get emails from guys in Germany, guys that come back after serving overseas, that are stationed to us, and be like, hey, when I was deployed, we used to listen to you all the time. That can't get beat, at least to me. I mean, I don't know how you can beat that kind of.
All right. So my final question to you will be, let's say tomorrow, Alabama or Michigan, UCLA, come knocking on the door and say, you know what? We want you to be our play-by-play guy. What would you say?
I don't know if I could get a better situation than I'm in now, personally and professionally. So sure, if someone called me and was able to sell me that it was going to be a better situation, to work with kids and a department that is going to be as good to me as Army is and my family, sure, but I can't see that happen.
Wow. Very, very, very lucky. Not a lot of people can say that. So as somebody who's clearly figured things out, for young people who are listening to the show right now, who want to break in, want to figure out, how they're going to get into this world and get good at this and land a spot like you've got, maybe that's a unicorn, but what advice do you have for young people who want to get into play-by-play or into this business in general?
And I don't know how much it's changed, with digital age and, there being so many ways to, do play-by-play now and, get it out there with online. But my whole thing is you're not going to learn unless you're doing it. So if there's, if you're having a decision to make about going to a college where you're going to be able to get on air early or get on air later, I mean, there's advantages, disadvantages to both. Of course, if you're on early, it's great. You don't want to pick up bad habits, but that you're only going to, it's like a rookie quarterback, right? You're only going to get better by being out there and playing. So, and I would say is always figure out a way to do it. Don't bide your time thinking you're going to be a producer, you're going to be doing stuff off the air and everything. And then suddenly the break is going to come where you go on the air because you know what? They're probably going to hire someone that was doing stuff on the air.
Interesting.
And that's my biggest thing is just get out there and do it and be as versatile as you can. And another line I use is, make yourself hard to fire, right? Volunteer to do different things, get out of your comfort zone, do different things. So when they're invariably in any business, media included, when they've got to make hard decisions on who to keep and who to let go, have it be when they get to that name, Rich DeMarco, be like, hey, you know what, Rich, he's doing a lot for us. I don't know. He's someone we want to keep. Don't pigeonhole yourself to where you'll be, easily lopped off. And that's hard. That's hard to do sometimes because I picked up news reporting. I picked up some different things. And it got me into news now. Now I'm a huge news junkie because of that. But that's a whole other conversation. But that's it. Just make yourself hard to fire. And I think if you say that to someone, they'll figure out how to become hard to fire. So that's my.
Didn't I give you a piece of advice when you were interning very similar to that, which was, how do I get on the air? Well, I want to be on the air I want to get on the air. And what did I say to you? I think it was, if you want to be on the air, be on the air.
Yep.
Because it's not going to happen here. Right.
Sweeney Murdy as well. I mean, that was, and I'm lucky enough to keep in touch with Sweeney over the last several years. And that was the other, he'll always say, Sweeney Murdy is one of those realistic people I've ever talked to about the media. So he's always great to bounce things off of, whether texting or what have you. And, those are the people doing it, right? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's you could be the Yankee beat reporter for FAN, but when the Yankee play-by-play job opens, you know what? That's probably going to go to someone who's doing play-by-play.
Yep.
And just thinking like that keeps you centered and keeps you clear on what you got to do.
Now, before we let you go, we have to do this. I think I owe it to Larry Shea and I and the rest of our audience. Do you have one ridiculous Tushar story that you can send us off with?
Oh, I got to come.
Just one?
This is good. So when Tushar, when you were Tushar would just disappear sometimes for half an hour.
An hour.
So the FAN was was picking up Scott Farrell on Tushar knows where this is going on whatever on the airwaves at 11 o'clock at night. I'm working
10 o'clock, I believe. He came on at 10.
And Bob Usler's there doing the evening updates. So we're listening to Farrell. It's he has this ridiculous guy on talking New York sports who's giving nicknames to Mets and Yankees and everything. And he's like, what is this? And then he goes, Farrell says, I'm with my guy Tushar the Freak from New York. And Tushar was actually this character that would call into Farrell and talk about.
Oh my God!
Players.
I was doing that from the back tape room. I was doing it from the back tape room, and I remember Farrell asked me to talk Rangers hockey with him. I knew very little about hockey. I still do. I still really don't know hockey all that well. I knew hockey well that night, boy. Let me tell you.
Oh my God.
And he was Tushar the Freak.
Tushar the Freak from Long Island on line 2.
That was his. I'll leave you with that one. I do think about that one from time to time. Whenever I see Pharrell somewhere, I always think of that.
That is perfect. So thank you for setting us up with that. Every time we talk to anybody who knows Tushar, we make sure we pull at least one of these stories, and eventually we're going to put together an episode of Tushar roast stories, and it's going to be a good one.
Tushar the Freak.
Exactly. Tushar, we might now title it Tushar the Freak. That's actually
very
perfect.
little
Thank
has changed in those 20 some odd years.
So, Rich, thank you for coming on with us. This was, so interesting hearing about working with a prestigious, university or institution like West Point. It's just a remarkable story, a remarkable journey. Rich, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Really, it's awesome spending this time with you guys.
Well, I want to thank Rich for many different things, and perhaps the height of my thank you is for giving us yet another Tushar story that will undoubtedly be on our Best of Tushar episode that, at least in my mind, is in the works. So with that, Tushar, what a remarkable guy, and what a remarkable story.
Very few of us have the opportunity to have our quote-unquote dream job as our second job out the box, right? So he was like, I want to be the play-by-play guy at Rutgers, but there comes along this job, and then it turns out that he's there for the next 20 years. It is extremely rare, almost non-existent, where you're able to have that kind of longevity at any one organization. Look at my own career. I have been through at least 6 or 7 places at one point. I thought I'd be at WFAN for the rest of my life. Didn't happen. I thought I'd be at certain other places for a long time. It didn't happen. There's a certain amount of movement that happens in anyone's career, and it's going to happen for everybody at one point or another. But for someone to say, I have been at this one institution for 20 years, and that's why I asked him the question, hey, you know what? If one of the crown jewels of college football came to you, whether it be Michigan, whether it be Alabama, whether it be, UCLA, USC, would you take that job? And for him to say, I'd have to seriously think about it and probably say no, that's because he understands that this notion of tradition and this notion of history sometimes trumps all that stuff. And that's what you have at an academy like West Point, at Annapolis and Navy, at Air Force. These places go back to the very birth of America. And that is a tradition and a history that you cannot find anywhere else.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, T. It's funny, though. He played the long game. He said that more than once, right? Like, play the long game when you're looking for a job like this. And he's not there by accident. Like, when you listen to him describe the preparation that he goes through for these games and how he learned each year, he was like a great player, like adding an element of his game each offseason, right? Like, oh, I want to incorporate more personal stories this year. Or I want to try this year. I mean, he's not there by accident, folks. It's so funny because what a lesson. Even when we get our dream job, you got to work to keep it and you got to get better. And there's always room to improve. And that's what I felt from Rich, that he's not satisfied. He's thrilled, but he's not satisfied, and he's going to keep trying to get better. And excellence, isn't that what West Point goes after, is excellence? So good for him. What a great story, for sure.
One thing I was very impressed about is to know at a young age that I want to do play-by-play on the collegiate level, not on the pros. And he's right. I've always thought that the college athletic realm lends itself to a lot more fun. I always say, if you get to work on a college campus for your career, it keeps you young because the kids are always the same age and you never really get to grow old. And that is a different vibe than being part of a pro organization. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying it's way different.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And, coming back to the advice that he gave at the end, and we've heard this from other broadcasters as well, it's not just about working. It's not just about getting reps. I mean, that's obviously the crux and the core of everything. But it's a matter of doing what you love and doing it and making the decision that that's where you're going and that's where you're headed. And don't take other jobs, so to speak. Don't get distracted. Don't do something that's not related just to get in the door, start working and believe in your path and believe in your vision and go after it. If you're a play-by-play guy, that's who you want to be, do it. Incredible, incredible advice. So with that, Rich DeMarco, thank you so much for joining this episode of No Wrong Choices. We also thank you for joining us. If this episode made you think of an inspiring person in your life who could be a great guest, please send us a note via the contact page of our website at NoWrongChoices.com. We also encourage you to connect with us on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, X, and Threads. On behalf of Tushar Saxena, Larry Shea, and me, Larry Samuels, thank you again. And always remember, there are no wrong choices on the road to success, only opportunities, because we learn from every experience.